explain to me how a team that was projected to finish a bottom five team, being a top 10 team, and their head coach, who was a first year head coach in the National Hockey League, isn't even listed among the top 10 favorites to win the Jack Adams Award for the top head coach in the NHL in a given season. Make that make sense to me, please.
You're listening to the PuckUps podcast. It's time to hit the ice with Brian D. Felice.
Welcome into episode 25 of the PuckUps podcast. I am Brian D. Felice, and thank you all for joining me. On today's show, we're going to go over the Bruins games against the Dallas Stars and the Florida Panthers. I also want to touch on the Jack Adams Award and if the Vegas odds makers are overlooking head coach Marco Sturm. And then finally, could the Boston Bruins be a dark horse playoff team in the Eastern Conference this year? We'll get to all of that and more. But before we do, just a friendly reminder, if you haven't done so already, to please go ahead and subscribe to the PuckUps on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that you get your podcast. And to get in touch with me or be a part of the show, you can email me, info@thepuckups.com. You can tweet at me on X at @BrianDFleece_. You can tweet at the show at the PuckUps, or you can leave a comment on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, anywhere the show has a social media account and post content. Now let's start off with the Bruins game on Tuesday against the Dallas Stars at TD Garden. And it's always a fun and entertaining affair when the Stars come to town. When you think about the history between the Bruins and the Stars, dating back to the Minnesota North Stars days, there's always been a pretty good interconference rivalry there. Back in the late 70s, you had a bench-clearing brawl at the old Boston Garden where John Wensing challenged the entire North Stars bench to a fight. A couple years later, in the early 80s, there was another bench-clearing brawl at Boston Garden. Fast forward a couple of decades, and in the 08-09 season, you had Dallas come to town, where Steve Ott and Sean Avery ran around the ice with their hijinks and cheap shots and antics. And Andrew Ference laid out Steve Ott with a huge open ice hit and immediately dropped the gloves with Sean Avery. You had Sean Avery hit Milan Lucic from behind that game where Lucic and Mark Savard and Phil Kessel got in there. Shane Knighty fought Matty Niskanen, and it had Jack Edwards going crazy with some all-time quotes. Matty Niskanen's getting his kisser rearranged by Sheriff Shane Knighty. Matty Niskanen's not going to be a pretty little boy anymore. That game was outstanding, and it was a huge win for the Bruins back then. They were establishing their identity back in the 08-09 season. It was the year following their unbelievable playoff series against the Montreal Canadiens as the 8th seed. It was the first year under Claude Julien. And that second season under Claude was the 08-09 season. And that game against Dallas was, I want to say, in November. And the Bruins established themselves as one of the best teams in the NHL that year. They were the top team in the Eastern Conference. Of course, they got upset by Carolina in the second round that year. But it was the Bruins establishing an identity that would eventually culminate in a Stanley Cup championship in 2011. And speaking of 2011, they also had a huge game against Dallas that year at TD Garden where there were 3 fights in the first 3 seconds of the game. And I think the Bruins were up 2-0 after the first 2 minutes. And that was an incredible atmosphere, incredible game. Many Bruins fans cite that game as their favorite non-playoff game at the Boston Garden in recent memory. You had Sean Thornton going with Barch off the opening draw, and I think he broke Barch's jaw or fractured something in his cheek, maybe his cheekbone. And then you had Steve Ott go with Gregory Campbell, Soupy Campbell. You had Adam McQuaid fight some poor soul and KO'd him. That was an incredible game. So there's a ton of history between the Bruins and the Stars, and that's before July 4th, 2013, when the Bruins traded Tyler Seguin to the Dallas Stars, which kind of created a whole new dynamic to the Bruins and Stars history. Of course, the Tyler Seguin trade at the time, I remember where I was, and I couldn't really believe it because at that point in time, he had only played two and a half seasons with Boston because his rookie year was his rookie year and he was getting his feet wet. And then his sophomore season was a full 82 game year for Seguin. And he was honestly the Bruins' best player in that first round against Washington the year they were defending their cup. And obviously they got bounced in round one, but Seguin was, I think, the Bruins' best player. And then the following year, which ended up being Seguin's last year in Boston, it was a lockout shortened season. So he only played, whatever it was, 49 games that year, 48, whatever the lockout season was. And of course, he was a bit underwhelming in those playoffs, but Jaromir Jagr came in at the deadline and Claude Julien put him in Seguin's spot with Bergeron and Marchand. And next thing you know, he's in Dallas. And we all know that Tyler was not the most mature player off the ice at that point in his life. And I'm sure the Bruins had their reasons, but here comes Riley Smith and Louis Eriksson and Matt Frazier and Joe Morrow. The latter two names I mentioned barely played for the Bruins. And so for the next 10 years, but specifically those first couple of years after the Seguin trade, every time Dallas came to town, it was a big story. Here comes Tyler Seguin and his return to Boston. And Seguin, to his credit, had a lot of FU moments to the Bruins organization in Boston where he had some big goals. He had an overtime winner one year. So, yeah, the Bruins and the Stars, obviously, Seguin's still around. He's not as much of an integral part of that Stars team anymore, but he's been battling injuries left and right the last 5, 6, 7 years. And this game in particular, he also wasn't in the lineup due to injury, and I think he's been shut down for the year pretty much. Long-winded way of me saying that there's a ton of history between the Boston Bruins and the Minnesota North Stars / Dallas Stars dating back decades and decades. And for two teams that don't really play each other head-to-head very often, being in different conferences, there's a decent rivalry there. So, how did the latest installment of the rivalry go? I say rivalry loosely. It's not exactly Bruins Canadians, but you know what I'm saying. I just laid out that past history. The Bruins don't have that past history with, the LA Kings or the Anaheim Ducks or the San Jose Sharks. There's some history with every team, of course. And I mentioned San Jose. The Bruins traded Joe Thornton to San Jose. So there's some history there, but you get my point. Not every Western Conference team and Eastern Conference team have the same rich history that I would say the Bruins and Dallas Stars have, especially if they're never playing in a Stanley Cup final against each other. But nonetheless, this recent game for the Bruins was the latest example of why Boston is going to be a team worth taking serious in the postseason this year, because Boston has had a very, very gruesome schedule the last little while, and they continue to perform and showcase that they can play with pretty much anybody. This was the second time in as many home games that Boston welcomed one of the top teams in the NHL and one of the top teams in the Western Conference to the TD Garden and found a way to win pretty convincingly. Of course, over the weekend, it was Minnesota who came to Boston, the Minnesota Wild, not the North Stars. And Boston handled them pretty well. Now, I know Dallas and Minnesota are two teams that are, they know where they're going to be playing the first round. They'll be playing each other, ironically. And it's going to be a matter of who's the home seed. But outside of that, there's not a ton for them to play for, so I get it. But listen, give credit to the Bruins because they started this game on time as well. Marat Husnadinov gets the Bruins on the board in the first period with a nice second effort in the slot. Bit of a garbage goal, but again, Husnadinov, 15 goals on the year now. That's a good pickup by the Bruins. You trade Justin Brazeau to the Minnesota Wild, you get back Jacob Lauko, and this young player that nobody knows much about in Marat Husnadinov, and he's just been a great find. Brazeau is not even with Minnesota anymore. He went to Pittsburgh. And listen, he's having a good little year for the Penguins too, in his own right. But he's also, I want to say 27, 28 years old. Marat's 23, and he has a ton of speed, ton of skill, and he's only going to get better and better with more seasoning in the NHL. So Yoki Haru gets the primary assist on the goal, and good for Yoki Haru, which is 12th assist of the year. Pasternak gets a bank pass off the boards to Yoki Haru at the point, and Yoki Haru just gets a shot through on net, and Husadinov finds the rebound. 1-0 Boston. Pasternak would get his 65th assist of the season and the second of the game. Later on in the first period, getting Victor Arvidsson on the board for his 22nd goal of the year. 2-0 Boston, garbage goal, a classic Victor Arvidsson goal in the crease, in the blue paint, getting his nose dirty, and it's 2-0 Boston. Jamie Benn and Matt Duchene would bring Dallas back to even with goals to make it 2-2. And then you enter the third period, and here's Elias Lindholm. The Bruins have a carryover power play. About 17 seconds left in the man advantage at the start of the third period. And honestly, one of the things I hate the most as a fan is the carryover power play, right? When it's your team. There's nothing like getting a power play with a minute and a half left in a period or 40 seconds. And especially in a game, not that this was the case, but when it happens in games where you haven't had a power play yet and you're just waiting for the refs to finally give you a call, and they finally give you a power play in the final minute or two, and it's not enough for a full power play. I hate that because it just feels like when a power play is broken up by an intermission, it doesn't usually go well on the second half of it. The opposition has an opportunity to rest, recover, game plan for a whole intermission about how they want to kill the penalty. And yeah, you have fresh ice, but I don't know, sometimes the puck just zips around too quick for players, whereas when it's later on in the period, yeah, it's a little snowy, but you've been used to the ice at that point. So, but to the Bruins' credit, they have 17 seconds to work with, and Jonathan Aspero moves the puck through the neutral zone to David Pasternak, who does a quick backhand pass to Elias Lindholm coming down the right wing. And 17 seconds to start the power play, to start the period on a power play, there's barely any time to get the power play set up and capitalize. And that's why you kind of felt like they weren't going to be able to do anything with it. But they didn't need to set it up because they scored in transition. And Elias Lindholm takes that puck, takes that pass from David Pasternak, and a hell of a shot. That's a goal scorer's goal by Elias Lindholm. We haven't been able to say that all too much this year because even his 16 prior goals, some of them were empty nets, some of them were garbage goals. Elias Lindholm hasn't had a ton of pretty goals this year. This is a pretty goal. Pretty goal for Lindholm, who I want to say had 5 goals in his last 6 games at the time of scoring this goal. This was his 5th goal in his last 6 games. So Elias is starting to feel a little bit more confident. Hopefully his line mate in Morgan Geekie can get that sense of confidence pretty soon too. We'll get to him in a little bit here. But then it's Henry Jokiharju who gets his first goal as a Bruin. He's been rostered with the Bruins dating back to last trade deadline, so about a calendar year. First goal as a Bruin, first goal of the season. And it's a feel-good goal for him, who walked in and had a nice finish. So good for Jokiharju. He's been a player that I was all over for the first 50, 60% of the season. Just wasn't up to snuff for me. He wasn't doing much of anything. He wasn't particularly great in transition, wasn't particularly great defensively, wasn't particularly great physically. He was just kind of a guy, but I'll give him credit. He's been, for I'd say about a month before the Olympic break, he's been fine. He's been fine. He's not flashy, but he's been okay for the most part. I didn't love one of his plays against the Florida Panthers on Thursday. We'll get to that when we get to that game. But for the most part, Jokiharju's been fine. I mean, Peake's been the one that's kind of been driving people up a wall lately. He's had some okay games, but a lot of off games. So I don't know. That 6th defenseman option for the Bruins, I don't know why they don't give Jordan Harris any more looks. Jordan Harris was playing good hockey before he got hurt back in November. He's gotten 1 game since being healthy. I'd give him another look at some point, but in any event, good for Jokiharju. And then it's Victor Arvidsson who gets the funniest hat trick of all time. 2 empty net goals to cap off the 6-3 win for Boston. Wyatt Johnson got a power play goal late, his 41st of the year. I think he leads the NHL in power play goals. But yeah, it was sandwiched around 2 empty net goals for Victor Arvidsson, who he's been a great story. And Victor Arvidsson, I wasn't sold on the trade for him. I didn't understand why the Bruins felt the need to trade for an aging forward with injury history who hasn't been producing to his past standards the last couple of years. I just felt like it was a bit of a gamble and one that just, I don't know, to take on his cap hit of whatever it is, 4.5 in the final year of his deal. I didn't think it was bad against the cap that much. It just, I didn't understand why they felt the need to trade for him when free agency was about to start in 10 minutes. But I'm glad they did because he's been really good for Boston. He now has 24 goals in the year. Good for Victor Arvidsson. Truly. Like, way to shut me up and everybody else who doubted his ability to have a bounce back season. But the reality is with certain players, you have to see it to believe it. And like I said a minute ago, Arvidsson's been dealing with injury history and production decreases the last couple of seasons. He's been up and down certain lineups. So now I've seen it. Now, and good for him to prove people wrong. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Bruins sign him to a 1 or 2 year extension. I think Marco Sturm loves him. I think he's a good fit in this system. I know he's obviously, 32, not 22, but he's been really good for this Bruins team. And he's been good in the power play. He's been really good at 5-on-5, and he's part of one of the best lines in hockey this year, which is him, Zacha, and Middlestad. Crazy, I know. But at a certain point, you have to tip your hat and say, yeah, you are what the numbers say you are. No doubt about it. So good for Arvidsson. It was a funny hat trick having 2 empty net goals, but it's a reward for how well he's played this year. And I believe that was the 5th hat trick of his career. So Victor Arvidsson leads the way, and that was Boston's 4th win in a row and their 6th win at the time in their prior 7 games. So you talk about a team that entered the last 3 weeks or so with a gauntlet of a schedule to finish the year, and they were in the thick. They've gained some separation now, and with this most recent loss to Florida that we'll touch on in a little bit, they are now 6 points up on wild card 2 and 6 points up on the first team outside the playoff picture, whereas after the Dallas game, they were 8 points up. So that went down a little bit. And after the Dallas game, they had a 98.2% chance of making the playoffs. Now it's down to 95. Ho-hum. But, they've had big win after big win after big win in big spots. A couple of weeks ago, they had to go to Detroit when they had the exact same record. The only difference was that the Bruins had the regulation wins tiebreaker over Detroit. But you go to Detroit and you win that game in regulation. That's a huge win. Then you have to go to Buffalo and play the Buffalo Sabres, who have been one of the best teams in hockey over the last 3 months, and they're currently one of the best teams in the league record-wise too. And you find a way to win that game in overtime. You beat the Minnesota Wild at home. Very difficult team to play. You go to Columbus and you beat the Columbus Blue Jackets, a team that's you're battling with for playoff positioning at the time, and you win that game after being down 3-0. So listen, then you beat Dallas. Like the Bruins, they had a stinker against Toronto. That was their lone loss, but even that loss, and that's even their lone loss in that 7-game stretch, not the worst thing long term, because you gave 2 points to a team that you have their first round pick in 2026, so long as it's not a top 5 pick. And right now, Toronto is hovering around the 7-8 spot from the bottom. So yeah, the 2 points being pissed away wasn't great for their playoff chances this year, but hey, you'll give Toronto 2 points if you can win the other 6 games in that 7-game stretch. So let's go hear from Marco Sturm after the game, head coach Marco Sturm, who was asked about the Bruins and their win against Dallas and how they continue to play just really strong hockey at the most important time of the season.
Marco, 4 straight wins against 4 really high-quality opponents. What kind of common threads, commonality have you seen from your group in these 4 games, and how does that bode moving forward in your push and potential postseason appearance?
Yeah, the good thing is that everyone was talking about, and it's true though. Everyone was talking about the schedule. The Bruins have the toughest schedule. Yeah, I believe that too. But what I liked about it is we always seems like play better when we are playing against better teams. And for us, the playoffs already started a long time ago. I think that's a good thing about our team right now. We want to get challenged right now, and against really good hockey teams, and I think that kept us in that race, playing against really good teams.
So I want to talk about Marco Sturm here for a bit because, my bold prediction on the Skate podcast before the season started was that Marco Sturm was going to win the Jack Adams Award. Now, listen, the nature of the conversation on WEEI's Escape podcast back in late September, it was meant to be a bold prediction, as in something that you don't think is going to happen. But if something crazy happens, what's that crazy thing that could happen? And I said, well, Marco Sturm will win the Jack Adams Award. And I was looked at like I had 10 heads, even though I thought that was a very fair, bold take to give. And the reason why I said that was, listen, this Boston Bruins team is not expected to do anything. Most people have them as a bottom 5, bottom 10 team in the league this year. So my thought process was very simple. If the Boston Bruins find a way to make the playoffs, then Marco Sturm has to be in consideration for the Jack Adams, because he took a team that nobody outside that dressing room has believed in this offseason and made the postseason with them. He made the most with the least, or in theory, he would have. He would have made the most with the least. And so that was my bold prediction before the season started. And right now, it's coming to fruition. But it's interesting because the Vegas odds makers do not have him listed in even the top 10 of Jack Adams favorites. And again, if you aren't familiar with the Jack Adams Award, it is the award that's given to the NHL coach who has done the best job in that given season. So I want to add some context here, because it's mind-boggling to me that Marco Sturm is not even listed in a top 10 of NHL coaches this year for the Jack Adams. And that's not me throwing shade at the other coaches. Believe you me, I have nothing but respect for all of the coaches on this list and what they've done with their respective teams. And I wholeheartedly think that a lot of them should be where they are. My whole thing, though, is that Marco Sturm should be right there alongside with them. And before the season started, Marco Sturm wasn't even listed in the top 22 NHL head coaches for preseason Jack Adams selections. There were 22 NHL head coaches that had odds to win a Jack Adams. Marco Sturm wasn't one of them. Okay, so that speaks to Vegas before the season not acknowledging Marco Sturm as a possibility. Okay, so put that off to the side for a second. Before the season started, Vegas also had the Boston Bruins finishing 28th in the NHL out of 32 teams with an over-under point total of 80.5. So let's recap for a second. Before the season started, Vegas did not list Marco Sturm in the top 22 coaches that could possibly win a Jack Adams. And they had the Boston Bruins finishing 28th out of 32 teams. Well, as I currently record, the Boston Bruins have 94 points in 76 games. So their over-under point total on the year for an 82-game schedule was 80.5. And they're at 94 with 76 games played. They're on pace for 100 points. The Boston Bruins are 43, 25, and 8. They are wild card 1. They're 4th in the Atlantic. They're 5th in the Eastern Conference, and they're 8th in the NHL. So they were predicted to finish 28th in the National Hockey League. And right now, with under 10 games to go in the regular season for all teams, they are 8th overall. Yeah, they're in the wild card in the East. Yeah, they're 4th in their own division. But they're 5th in their conference and they're 8th overall in the NHL. So somebody explain to me how a team that was projected to finish a bottom 5 team, being a top 10 team, and their head coach, who was a first-year head coach in the National Hockey League, isn't even listed among the top 10 favorites to win the Jack Adams Award for the top head coach in the NHL in a given season. Make that make sense to me, please. Now, I want to also say that there are a lot of deserving coaches that are listed. And there's a couple that are listed that, to me, even though they're doing a great job this year, and even though that they're great coaches, to me, aren't really in the spirit of the Jack Adams to me. And I'm going to name a couple of those guys. And again, I'm not trying to throw shade, but John Cooper, the head coach of the Tampa Bay Lightning, and Jared Bednar, the head coach of the Colorado Avalanche. These two guys, to me, are two of the they're among the best coaches in the NHL. There's no doubt about that. Okay? But to me, the spirit of the Jack Adams Award is the coach who did the best job. And when you look under the hood, to me, that's a coach who has optimized his roster. He's made the most out of the least. He's made the best meal with the worst ingredients. That, to me, is the nature of the Jack Adams Award. The Tampa Bay Lightning, everybody expected the Tampa Bay Lightning to be a playoff team. Everybody expected Tampa to be a top 3 team in the Atlantic, and many had them finishing 1st or 2nd. Everybody had Tampa as a top 5 team in the Eastern Conference and a top 10 team in the NHL. They've been a perennial 100-plus point team for the last 10, 15 years. They've been to 3 Stanley Cup finals in the last 8 years, whatever it's been. They've got 2 cups to their name, all under the jurisdiction of head coach John Cooper. John Cooper was the head coach for Team Canada at the Olympics. I say all this to say that we expect the world out of John Cooper. The hockey world expects the most out of John Cooper. Nobody, and I mean nobody, is surprised that John Cooper and the Tampa Bay Lightning are where they are. And good for them for doing it. All the props in the world, but it's not surprising. It's not a story. I know Victor Hedman had injury issues this season. I know Braden Point's been out. I know Anthony Cirelli's been out. Tampa Bay has had their fair share of injuries. I know that. I'm not trying to discredit what they've done. All I'm trying to say is, for the most part, it's been kind of expected. And when you talk about omitting Marco Sturm, a guy that was not even listed in the top 22 coaches before the season as a candidate to win the Jack Adams, mainly because nobody believed his team could even be there. The reason Marco Sturm wasn't among those 22 names is because nobody thought Boston would have a season worth half a damn for him to even be acknowledged. And that's confirmed with Vegas predicting the Bruins to finish 28th overall in the NHL. So again, it makes no sense to me that Marco Sturm, based on the predictions for both him and the team entering the season and where they are currently with a 95% chance of making the playoffs, how they're not even in the conversation right now. Here's another name, Jared Bednar. Again, Colorado is the best team in the NHL. Is anybody surprised by that? That, to me, the Colorado Avalanche, they've been a top 10 team in the NHL for 7 straight seasons. And there's a Stanley Cup championship included in that time frame. The last time that they finished outside the top 10 in the overall NHL standings was the 18-19 season. So, again, I'm not saying that Jared Bednar isn't doing a phenomenal job this year and that the Colorado Avalanche aren't having an amazing season. They are. They are. They're the number 1 seed in the NHL right now. But is Jared Bednar making the most with the least? No. He's doing what he should be doing with the most. I mean, that roster is stacked. Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar, right there you have 2 of the top 4 players in the world. So Marty Necas is an absolute animal. Brock Nelson's an amazing player. They have a ton of speed and skill on that team. Nobody is surprised that the Colorado Avalanche are the first place team in the NHL right now and the odds-on favorites to win the Stanley Cup. So again, amazing job by the Avs and by Bednar, but to me, him being at least over Sturm, it makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me when you consider the nature of what this award should be for. Now, here are some names that make total sense to me. Lindy Ruff with the Buffalo Sabres makes total sense. Lindy Ruff has turned that Buffalo team around. They're going to break their 14-year playoff drought. They did not have a good start to this season, and they've been phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal for the last 3-4 months. Rick Bowness with the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, this one to me, even this one to me is a little bit over Sturm. I mean, Bowness came in halfway through the year, and he turned that Blue Jackets season around in incredible fashion. Bowness should be on this list. He should be on this list. I'm not saying he shouldn't. But again, Marco Sturm's been there all season long. And the Bruins have been doing this all season long, and they've had their ups and downs as well. So I'm okay with Bowness on this list for the spirit of the award, more so than a John Cooper or a Bednar. But again, I don't see why Marco Sturm's not on this list either. Joel Quenneville with the Anaheim Ducks. Sure, no problem. Quenneville's first year back in the NHL coaching and whatever it's been, 3, 4, 5 years. I don't know how long his suspension was, but that Anaheim Ducks team, they have a ton of speed and skill, a lot of youth, but they needed the proper guidance and a system to get themselves to where they are, which right now is a playoff team. And I believe that they're the top team in the Pacific, which is, by the way, the weakest division in hockey this year, but nonetheless. Dan Muse in Pittsburgh. Now, this is very comparable to Marco Sturm in Boston. I have no issue with Dan Muse on this list. He should be on this list. 11 out of 10 times Dan Muse should be on this list. Nobody, and I mean nobody, had the Pittsburgh Penguins making the playoffs this year. Similar to Boston, everybody had them as a bottom 5, bottom 10 team. In fact, a lot of the narrative around the Pittsburgh Penguins this offseason was, which team is Sidney Crosby going to accept a trade to at the deadline to go win a cup or try to win a cup? So Dan Muse has done a fantastic job in Pittsburgh, and I think similar to Marco Sturm, he has made the most with the least, or so we thought, right? Ryan Warsofsky with San Jose. Again, this is a good one to me. San Jose is on the playoff bubble in the West, and nobody expected them to finish as a playoff team. Everybody had them as still a team that's rebuilding and, will probably finish towards the bottom despite having a ton of talent. And Macklin Celebrini has gone on an unbelievable pace for a 19-year-old with 100 points already this season. And so, yes, you can look at Ryan Warsofsky and say he should be in this conversation. I agree. He should be, because he's taken a San Jose Sharks team that everybody expected to be a bottom 5, 10 team again. And they're on the playoff bubble right now. They're, I think, 1 point out of a playoff spot in the Western Conference. But the Bruins have 20 more points than San Jose. So it's a great story that San Jose in the West is a bubble playoff team, and Ryan Warsofsky is the man behind the bench to do it. That's amazing. But the Bruins have 20 more points, and they're in a more competitive division and conference. So I don't know why Marco Sturm is being completely overlooked. It's not even that these guys are probably being looked. I don't think these guys shouldn't be here. Again, I think John Cooper and Jared Bednar, that's like Bill Belichick winning the coach of the year um for the Patriots when he was already the greatest coach in the league. Like this award is not for coaches who are doing what you expect them to do with rosters that we expected them to win with. It's about which coach, took a roster that people really didn't have high hopes for and did something with. So I don't know. Ultimately, I think like Marty St. Louis is another one. Marty St. Louis, I think he should be on this list. But even Montreal, with all their speed, skill, and youth, they made the playoffs last year. Most people had the Canadiens as a playoff team this year. Most people did. So the fact that Montreal is third place in the Atlantic Division, only 4 points up on Boston. Again, why is Marco Sturm not in the conversation? So I know this has probably turned into a bit of a rant, but somebody make it make sense to me. Somebody make it make sense to me. Like, I don't know. I don't get it. I really don't get it. But in any event, we can move along to the Bruins' most recent game against the Florida Panthers. Now, speaking of Marco Sturm, he was quoted after the game saying that his team did not respect their opponent tonight in the Florida Panthers. Now, you might hear that and say, how on God's green earth could you not respect the Florida Panthers? Well, as we know, the Florida Panthers started the year without Alex Barkov, their captain and number one center, who to this point still hasn't played this year, and I doubt that he ever does this season. And they started the year without Matthew Tkachuk for the first 2.5 months. So after going to 3 straight Stanley Cup finals and winning the last 2, the Florida Panthers, they have just played so much hockey. You knew that the war of attrition was going to catch up to them, at least at some point. And it caught up to them this year. And to their credit, I think they're kind of embracing it. Next year, you bet your ass the Florida Panthers are going to be back in the playoffs. I think the Florida Panthers are still the best team in the Eastern Conference when fully healthy. They just haven't been nearly fully healthy this year at any point. So I say all that because Florida's season is over. They are booking tee times. And honestly, with the 4 springs that they've had the last little while here, they deserve it. But they've shut a lot of guys down. Okay, Sam Reinhart's out of the lineup. Aaron Ekblad was out of the lineup against Boston. Brad Marchand, Anton Lundell, Alex Barkov, Aaron Ekblad. The list goes on. Evan Rodriguez. There were 9 regulars out of the lineup for the Florida Panthers against Boston on Thursday. Balinskis. Mikko Mikkola. Nico Mikkola. So there was a lot of guys out of the lineup. It was pretty much the Boston Bruins versus Seth Jones, Sam Bennett, Matthew Tkachuk, Sergei Bobrovsky, and Carter Verhaeghe, and the Charlotte Checkers, which is the Panthers farm team. Here's the quote that Marco Sturm said after the game to Nesson. He said, "We didn't respect our opponent. I think that's the bottom line. We looked over probably, and we saw a lot of guys out, and we didn't respect the Stanley Cup champion. And that was it. That was the game. And then after that, we were chasing. We addressed it before the game. It doesn't matter who's in or who's out for them. They're champions for a reason, and we didn't really respect that at all. That's the frustrating part." So that is in direct response to the Boston Bruins pretty much having a no-show for first 40 minutes of action. They weren't sharp. They did not have their A, B, or even C game at all. It was not a good game for the Boston Bruins for the first 40 minutes. They were down 2-0. And then Fraser Minton, on a good hardworking shift between him, Husadinov, and David Pastrnak, they finally get the Bruins on the board with time ticking down in the first period to cut Florida's lead in half to 2-1. but nobody really stepped up in the second period. To Boston's credit, they finally got going in the third. The Bruins were the much better team in the third period, but the Florida Panthers didn't really. You could tell that their top players weren't that interested. Matthew Tkachuk, Sam Bennett, Carter Verhaeghe, Seth Jones. They were just kind of out there. They weren't their normal antagonistic selves. Matthew Tkachuk was a perfect Samaritan out there. Sam Bennett wasn't doing what we normally see him do in terms of physicality and agitation. Sergei Bobrovsky was outstanding, especially in the third period, and he's the reason why Florida ended up winning that game. And he was definitely one of their regulars who came to play. But beyond that, you had a bunch of guys a lot of them were AHL players that have been called up recently, and they were trying to make the most of their opportunity, and so they were trying their asses off. But what Marco said is absolutely true. The Bruins, they looked over at the Florida bench and said, "Hey, who's that? Who's that? Who's that? Who's that? There's Tkachuk, there's Bennett, who's that?" And they thought they were gonna probably skate their way to a pretty easy win. Well, it wasn't meant to be. And by the time the Bruins woke up, it was too late. So, disappointing game for the Bruins. As I mentioned, Fraser Minten gets his 17th goal of the year, so good for him. Hustadinov gets a assist on the play, his 18th of the year, and Pasternak gets his 67th assist. But there just wasn't a whole lot to take away from this game other than the fact that Jeremy Swayman was fantastic for the Boston Bruins, despite the losing effort by the team. Swayman, especially in the first 40, was very, very good. And he continues to be really good. The Bruins goaltending has been very good. And I want to get to Swayman a little bit later on. Something else that happened in the second period and parts of the third were that Marco Sturm put David Pasternak with Morgan Geekie and Elias Lindholm. And he put Lucas Reichel with Hustadinov and Minten for a little bit. And then in the third period, Reichel didn't really play much at all. And Pasternak was kind of double shifting with Lindholm and Geekie and Hustadinov and Minten. But it's in an effort to get Geekie going and Elias Lindholm going. But Lindholm's been, as I said during the Dallas recap, Lindholm has been producing more of late. Morgan Geekie, he is struggling. Morgan Geekie's struggling. He has gone now 15 games without a goal for Morgan Geekie. And that is just not what anybody on the Bruins is looking for out of him. He's a guy that he doesn't impact play all that much when he's not scoring goals. And that's on him to try to figure that out, right? It's on him to figure out, how can I be a positive impact when I'm not finding the back of the net? And he's fighting it right now. He's fighting it. He did have a strong second half of the third period, and he had a couple of grade A chances to score, but he was invisible before that. And if the Bruins want to do damage in the postseason, they're going to need Morgan Geekie scoring again. They just are. He's gone, as I said, 15 games now without a goal. He has, I want to say, 2 goals since the Olympic break ended. So it's 2 goals in his last 19 games. And somehow, some way, he's still leading the Bruins in goal scoring, and he's still second on the team in points. All right. I mean, Pavel Zacha was the NHL's 3rd star for the month of March. He had 22 points in 16 games. Morgan Geekie's had 9 points in the last 19 games, and somehow he's still second on the team in scoring, which just goes to show how strong of a first half he had to the season. But again, he can get going. And once he gets going, the confidence will be there, and he can start to be effective again. But the Bruins are going to want him to get going before the postseason, because Morgan Geekie is not a player that snaps out of scoring funks easily. He starts to feel it a little bit. So let's go to Morgan Geekie now and hear what he had to say after the game. And he talked about his recent struggles and the Bruins lost to the Panthers.
One real good look there in the third period. Are you trying to pick the corner there, high glove?
Just trying to score. Yeah, just trying to beat him. That's all.
When you're going through something like this with the team winning, does that kind of help
ease the frustration for you? I mean, obviously they didn't tonight, but the recent
Yeah.
stretch.
Yeah, I mean, these are important games, and, we're winning games at the end of the day. It doesn't really matter how we do it, and, it just feels like tonight you kind of let everybody down. You have your opportunities, and it's just tough. It's been a tough stretch, I feel like, and it's one of those things that just try to man up and gut through it. But, it does help when you win, but obviously tonight stings a little more.
I mentioned online, if Morgan Geekie can have more shifts consistently the way that he finished that game, he's not going to be in a goal scoring drought much longer. But the problem has been he's just not been showing enough determination and desire to get off the schneid. He's not crashing the net. He's not getting his nose dirty in the crease. He's not going to the dirty areas where you get garbage goals, where a puck can go off your shin pad and in. He's too much on the perimeter, and he's too much looking for that perfect shot, and he's overthinking. Morgan Geekie hasn't even been in a situation lately of, oh, he's getting all the shots, but they're just not going in for him. His shooting percentage is down. No, he hasn't been getting that many shots off at all. And that, to me, has been the most alarming part is, and players say it all the time that are going through goal scoring droughts. The media will ask them, are you fighting it a bit, or are you discouraged by not scoring? And a lot of times players will say, I'd be more discouraged if I wasn't getting the looks, but I am getting the looks. And so it's a matter of time. But Morgan hasn't been getting the looks, not frequently enough. In the Florida game, the last 10 minutes of the game, he was getting the looks. And for the first time in a long time, I said, oh, wow, now you're starting to see Morgan Geekie getting his shots off here. And he was playing with more, as Cam Neely would call it, piss and vinegar. There was one shift in the third period where he finally came out there where Marco Stern put Pasternak with him and Geekie for a bit, and then they just didn't do anything. So Marco Stern said, you know what, fine, I'll take him away from you guys. And he took Pasternak away from Geekie and Lindholm. And that very next shift, Geekie came out with a man on, his hair was on fire. Well, I know Geekie doesn't, he's got a shaved head, but you know what I mean. And so I said to myself, where's that? He came off the bench and made a beeline to the crease in the slot. Man, there you go, Morgan. That's how you got to play when you're not scoring. You got to play that way all the time, but especially when you're not scoring. If you're going through a goal scoring drought, staying on the perimeter is not going to get it done for you. You have to get your nose dirty, and hopefully it's a sign of things to come for Morgan. If he keeps playing that way, I promise that he's going to snap out of it. And when he does, the confidence will get going, and he'll be a major contributor for the Bruins like he has been for so much of the last calendar year and a half. Okay, I'm not going to let these last 20 games dictate what I've seen out of Morgan for the previous 80 or so, dating back to last season. Okay, he can be that guy, but Morgan doesn't have a ton of foot speed, and he doesn't have a ton of one-on-one ability. Okay, so he has an amazing release, and he can make passes when he has time and space. He can make some plays. But for a guy like him, where speed's not his strength, shooting is, he has to fight to get open. He has to go to the dirty areas. Your goals aren't always going to be beautiful one-timers from the slot in transition or on the power play from David Pasternak. And I know he knows this, but you have go score some greasy goals. Go to where it's not fun to go and get some goals that way. Open up your arsenal of goal scoring ability. Don't just be a one-trick pony where you're a good snapshot or slap shot when you have time and space. Be that guy that's not afraid to score goals in any type of way. And if he can adopt that mentality and be more of a versatile goal scorer, he won't be relying so much on his bread and butter one-timers or snapshots. He knows he can do a little bit of everything. And so hopefully that's the next step for him. Okay, he needs to be more of a power forward than a finesse forward. It's just his one-on-one ability, his skating is not that of a finesse guy. Morgan's a power forward with a phenomenal release. He's a power forward with a 50 goal scorers release. That's what he is. And so he has to start to play more to that caliber. Don't be too pretty. Don't be too good. Don't be above mucking it up. Don't be above going into the corners, and don't be above going to the net and the crease and getting your nose dirty. And I think when Morgan's at his best, he's doing those things. So it's just a matter of getting back to it. Now, obviously, the game against the Florida Panthers was not one that the Bruins should hang their hats on. And it's not the best example of a team that could be a dark horse playoff team in the Eastern Conference this year. But if you look at the Bruins as a whole and what they've done this year, I mentioned that they're 8th overall in the NHL. They're wild card one. They're 4th place in their own division, right? They're 5th place in the conference. They're 4th in their division, but they're 8th overall in the NHL. So on the one hand, you can look at them and say, well, they're a wild card team, right? They're the underdogs. Okay. And, you look at their division and say, well, they're middle of the pack. And that's true too. But they're neck and neck. They're not far behind Montreal and Tampa. And they're closer to the top teams in the division than they are the wild card 2 team based on points. So can the Boston Bruins, can they be a dark horse playoff team in the Eastern Conference? I think they 1000% can be for multiple reasons. First and foremost, I don't think the Eastern Conference is that strong this year. I don't fear Carolina. I know that they are a team that is greater than the sum of their parts. I get that. I know they play a certain style that Rod Brindamore has them playing to a science over the last handful of seasons he's been there. Well, actually, he's probably been their coach for probably 8 seasons now. I don't fear Carolina like I would normally fear a top seed in the conference. They aren't that impressive to me on paper. They have some great players. I love Jacob Slavin. I really like Sebastian Aho. I like Andrei Svechnikov. I like Nikolai Ehlers. I like Seth Jarvis. Beyond that, they're a bunch of grinders. And I love that about them. I love that they're grinders. I hate their uniforms. I hate their white uniforms. They're trash. They will aesthetically ruin any playoff series that they're in just by wearing those things. But outside of that, I think that the Carolina Hurricanes are a very admirable team. I don't think any team, let alone the Bruins, sure. I don't think any team in the Eastern Conference should really fear the Carolina Hurricanes. I think they're the most pedestrian top seed that you'll come across, to be honest with you. Tampa Bay, I think that they are the best team in the conference. I think that Nikita Kucherov is stupid. He is so good, it's not even fair. I think he's the leading point scorer in the NHL right now, and he's done that multiple times before. He's quietly just one of the best players in the world. And I know he's got a couple of cups and he's not underrated anymore, but I still think Kucherov is still a bit underrated. I think the amount of times that you hear people talk about Nathan McKinnon and Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and Macklin Celebrini and all, I get it. I get the hype. I get it. But you just don't hear people talk about Kucherov as much, and he's unbelievable. But Vasilevsky's been struggling lately, but he's been a really good year. Victor Hedman, they're a really good team. I think Tampa is the best team in the conference right now. But then Montreal, I love the Canadiens. I know that's blasphemy to say on a Bruins-based podcast, but I think the Canadiens are a very fun team. They got a ton of speed and skill and youth, and I personally think it's way better for the NHL when the Montreal Canadiens are good, just like I think it's good for the Major League Baseball when the Red Sox and the Yankees are good and the Dodgers. The NHL is a better league when the Montreal Canadiens are good. And the Bruins and Canadiens rivalry is better when the Bruins and the Canadiens are both good at the same time. Boston and Montreal are currently amidst a 13-year playoff drought head-to-head against each other. They haven't played each other in 13 years in the postseason, and it will be 14 if they don't meet this year, which would probably have to be in the second round. And if the Bruins and the Canadiens don't meet in the playoffs this year, it'll be a 14-year head-to-head playoff drought, which will tie a franchise head-to-head drought record. So if the Bruins and Canadiens meet this year in the playoffs, then they'll tie their previous drought of 14 years, but they won't exceed it. They won't make a new record. So we'll see about that. But Montreal, I would favor Montreal over Boston in a playoff series. Sure. Right. Buffalo, Buffalo, they have a lot to prove. They're a ton of speed and skill and youth, but they haven't been in the postseason as an organization in 14 years, and none of their top players have been in the playoffs ever. So how do they handle the postseason, right? Pittsburgh, the Islanders. Right now, Ottawa holds wild card too, but they're tied with Detroit and Columbus, who are outside the playoff picture, but tied in points. Nobody that I just mentioned, I don't think the Bruins are incapable of beating in a 7-game series. I'm not saying that the Bruins would be the favorite, but the Bruins could keep up with anybody. I mean, even Tampa Bay, the Bruins have played really well this year. I mean, they lost by a goal earlier in the season in Boston. They had a 5-1 lead in the Stadium Series before they coughed it away in a circus act of a game. And then they got Tampa 2 more times before the season's end. So we can see the Bruins size themselves up against Tampa a couple more times. But yes, I think the Bruins can absolutely be a dark horse team in the Eastern Conference and make some noise. What does making noise mean? At least winning a round, maybe 2. And then from there, who knows, right? But I just think the biggest X factor for them is Jeremy Swayman. There aren't many teams in the Eastern Conference playoff picture that would get the checkmarking goal over Jeremy Swayman. I think Tampa Bay would with Andrei Vasilevsky, and I think you can make a case for the Islanders with Sorokin. But I think Jeremy Swayman he's the great equalizer for the Boston Bruins. And just to back up some numbers on him this year, he's faced the fourth most shots in the NHL this year, 1,456. He's tied with Jake Ottinger for the 3rd most wins in the NHL with 30. And then among goalies with 40 or more games played, Swayman ranks 3rd in goals save above expected. He ranks 2nd in goals save above expected per 60. He's 14th in goals against average, and he's 9th in save percentage. So he's playing phenomenal hockey for the Boston Bruins. Obviously, the goals against average and save percentage is not top 5, but he's a very good goalie, and his goals save above expected tells you that he's keeping the Bruins in a lot of games. And he was a big story last year. He was a big story last year with his contract negotiations going public. He did not have a good year. And with this year being the final year of his contract before his trade protection kicks in, if he had another off year, the conversation would be, do the Bruins trade him this past deadline do they trade him this past deadline before his no trade kicks in and get something for him before you're stuck with them? That was the nightmare worst case scenario. And fortunately, he kicked that hypothetical right in the teeth. And he has been really strong for Boston. And I just think that most teams in the Eastern Conference don't have that type of goaltending to back up their blunders when they happen, or their blunders when they happen. So I think Swayman alone gives you a ton of confidence in a playoff series. And then beyond Swayman, not every team has a Charlie McAvoy or David Pastrnak. Like, look at the Carolina Hurricanes. Again, just to kind of pick on them for a second. They don't have a David Pastrnak up front. They don't have a Charlie McAvoy in the back end. So I know where the Bruins sometimes lack in depth, other teams pick up. But, man, I absolutely think that the Boston Bruins are a dark horse in the Eastern Conference playoffs if they indeed end up qualifying, which they got a 95% chance of doing so. They have 6 games to go, and they have 6 points up on the teams beneath them. So, yeah, unless there's a colossal 2011 Red Sox type collapse, the Bruins should be a playoff team. And if they aren't, and they fall apart here, well, then you can kiss my whole Marco Sturm argument goodbye. You can kiss the playoff dark horse argument goodbye, and we'll have to erase this episode from the face of YouTube altogether. But yeah, I think the Eastern Conference in general is as wide open as I've ever seen it. So the dark horse conversation, I think, goes to everybody besides some of the favorites. I mean, no one's going to call Tampa or Carolina a dark horse because they're the favorites. But yeah, I think the Bruins definitely can make some noise. And my true dark horse, I think, is the Montreal Canadiens. I think the Montreal Canadiens, Buffalo too. But I mean, again, if Buffalo wins the division, well, you have the you have the expectations of a division champion and that you should win the first round. So you'll be the favorite, right? But they don't have the playoff experience. Montreal at least got some experience last year. And I do think that, I'm not sold on their team defense. I'm not sold on their goaltending. I love Fowler. If Fowler's in net, then that kind of changes things for me. But still, Montreal, they just got something special brewing there north of the border this year. And they got a lot of fun, young talent and some talent that's in their prime too. Like a Nick Suzuki is not super young anymore. He's still in his, mid late 20s, but he's not a kid, right? So they do have a good mix of players in their prime and players that have kind of been around a little bit. Ivan Demidov, it's a second year. Cole Caulfield, Nick Suzuki, Uri Slavkovsky, like those guys have been around for a little bit now. So I think Montreal, they're knocking on the door. Lane Hudson's obviously in the second year, right? Still, but I think Montreal can make some noise. And it's looking like they'll probably, they could play Buffalo still because the Atlantic's not solved. Right now, it'd be Tampa and Montreal 2-3, but we'll see what happens with that. In any event, thank you all very much for listening. Enjoy the Bruins game over the weekend against the Tampa Bay Lightning, and I'll be back on Monday to talk to you all. Take care.